Okay, we will start. Let me start the recording. Okay. Om Badram Karne Bishunuyama Devaha Badram Pashye Makshabiryajatraha Sthirairangai Tuštuvagum Sastanubihi Vyashema Devahitam Yadayuhu Swasti na Indro Vriddashavaha Swasti na Pusha Vishvavedaha Swasti nastarkshyo arishtanemihi Swasti no Brihaspatir dadatu Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Okay, last class when we met, we were looking at a very interesting analogy, a beautiful analogy rather, I would say, which the Upanishad has presented. We saw it, but being a very important analogy, it is important that we revisit it and try to understand it in a little more detail. So therefore, let me go to that mantra, which is the third mantra in the second section of the second Mundaka. So the mantra is like this. We will recite the mantra and understand it more deeply. Danur grihit Upanishadam mahastram sharam hyupasa nishitam sandhayita ayamya tadbhava gatena chetasa lakshyam tadevaksharam saumya vidhi. We saw this mantra last class. Danuhu grihitva mahashastram upanishadam danuhu grihitva. So by taking this great Dhanus called Upanishad, Hyupasa Nishitam Sharam, that arrow, Shara is arrow, that arrow which is sharpened by Upasa, Sharam hi Upasa Nishitam Sandayita, mount it, connect it to the Dhanus. Ayamya, withdrawing it back a little bit, Tadbhavagatena Chetasa, Lakshyam Tadbhavagatena Chetasa, focusing entirely, completely concentrating on the target, Tadevaksharam Saumya Vidhi, that Aksharam, that indestructible one, Hey Saumya, let that be Vidhi, penetrated. So that is what this mantra is. And if you recollect, I showed this picture last time when we spoke about this particular mantra. So you have the Jivatma. So this mantra is actually, first of all, it is an analogy. It talks about an arrow which is mounted on a bow, and the arrow is focused on a target, and so therefore the bow is a little bit stretched backwards to develop that velocity, and then you release it and then it reaches the Lakshya. So that is the analogy. So the analogy is the arrow is the Jivatma. The Lakshyam is the Brahman. Aksharam Saumya Viddhi. That's what it is saying. So the Lakshyam is Brahman. The bow is actually the Upanishadam Mahastram Upanishadam Grihitva. So the bow is the Upanishad. And then Upasa Nishitam. Use Upasana to sharpen the arrow. That is the next analogy it gives. Then I am a, which means you draw it inward, backward or inward, whatever it is. So this is what this analogy is. This analogy is to be understood very deeply. And this is the first level. That the bow is the Upanishad, the arrow is the Jivatma, the Lakshyam is the Brahman, etc. All these are first level understanding. This analogy is so beautiful that it conveys almost deeply what is required for Brahma Sakshatkara. And it has been the power of our rishis that in a very compact manner, using analogies of this kind, you will find one more analogy in Mundakopanishad. First mantra that you will find in the third Mundaka's first section also is a nice analogy. So the rishis have been able to communicate it so beautifully by taking a very nice sort of analogy. So this analogy needs to be understood a lot more deeply. So let us ask some basic questions. So we'll try to understand this analogy very much more closely. So that's what we must do. Now, the first question is, why is the Jivatma arrow? Why is the Jivatma, the analogy for Jivatma is the arrow? Now, if you look at this original, analogy, the very objective of an arrow, once it is released, is to meet its target. There is no other purpose. I mean, whatever be the reason why people are using bow and arrow, moment an arrow is released, it has only one objective, that it has to meet its target. Now, that is precisely why the Jivatma is called the arrow, because we all have a lakshya, an uddesha, a purpose for a janma. We all have a target in our life. The target can be, as I have written here, you may call it Atma Jnanam or Atma Sakshatkaram or Moksha Prapti, whatever you want to say, Jnana Sampadana. Actually, the goal of an individual is to liberate. That is the only goal. Now, all these other goals, today we have actually put these goals somewhere. It has gone out of picture. Instead, in modern parlance, we also teach it as parents in, educational institutions. Everywhere we keep teaching the goal is to, make money. The goal is to be very successful in life. The goal is to earn a lot of name and fame. Like this, we say so many things. I'm not saying all of them are unimportant. I am saying they are subordinate goals. After doing all that, what are we going to do? What is that superordinate goal? After getting a good education, what are we going to do? After getting a good job, what are we going to do? After earning a lot of money, what are we going to do? So that there is a mula uddesha. All these, to earn a lot of money, to, get well educated, to be materially very rich, all those are subordinate goals. Our ultimate goal, very purpose of Janma, as per the Sanatana Dharma, is that this Jivatma must know its true nature and reach its true potential and nature. So that is the only target. In fact, that's what, in Ishavasya Upanishad, you have this mantra, Vidyaya Mrityum Tirtva, Vidyaya Amritamashnute. So all these other things that we are talking about, which are all part of, if I have to use the Mundakopanishad terminology, Apara Vidya. Because in Shankara Bhashya, somewhere Shankaracharya says, Apara Vidya is Avidya. So, all these Apara Vidya is only used for crossing the ocean of mortality, crossing this ocean of birth and death. So, all these earning money, this fame, and this, all that is only for, if at all, to serve this cause. The ultimate goal is Vidyaya Amritamashnute. We should be able to reach that immortality through knowledge. So that is the only goal, and we have to constantly focus our attention towards that goal and reach that goal. And to indicate that, the arrow is taken. Because once the arrow is released, its only goal is to constantly, go towards the lakshya and then hit the target. So that is the reason Jivatma is the arrow. Why is Upanishadam Mahastram Upanishadam Grihitva? That's what the mantra says. Why is the Upanishad the bow? Now let us talk about the bow. See, if you have the arrow and without a bow, you will never be able to reach the target. You can't throw it with your hand. I mean, that's not how it is done. So the bow is required, because only with the help of the bow, the arrow can be directed towards its target. So in the same way, if the lakshya of the Jivatma is Atma Jnana or Atma Sakshatkaram, whatever way you want to say it, then it has to be launched onto that trajectory using something. And that is what is this Upanishad. So that is the subject matter of the entire Upanishad teaching. That is the Jnana Kanda of our Vedic corpus. So therefore, without the Upanishad teachings, it is not possible to understand, contemplate, leave alone reaching the Brahman. So we should know the path. See, if you want to go from here, let us say you want to go from here to, let us say, you are new to a city and you are in a particular place. You want to go to another place, then you need a map. The map needs to show you how to go. And today you have what is called the GPS and the Google map. So as you keep driving, you are able to find that you are on the right path. Where you have to take a left turn, you take a left turn. Where you have to take a right turn, you take a right turn. So somewhere you need all these inspection. Otherwise, you never reach your target. In the same way, the Upanishad tells us, gives us the Swarupa Lakshana, the Tatastha Lakshana of what we need to achieve. It gives us analogy. We are just looking at one such analogy now. It gives us an analogy. It gives us some examples. It gives us some methods to reach it. It is also telling us when we are going right and when we are going wrong. Also, it is like an instruction manual. Without the help of it, this Jivatma will never be able to reach the target. As the same way as we are saying that without the help of the bow, the arrow can never reach its target. Therefore, that is why this entire, when you say Upanishadam in this mantra, it just doesn't mean Upanishad. It means the Jnana Kanda. It means that all that corpus of knowledge which helps an individual understand the true purpose of life, contemplate on it, make whatever prayatna that is required and so on. So all those are indicated by the word Upanishadam, and this is really the equivalence of the bow in the case of the bow and arrow example. So that is why, look at here, this is from Viveka Chudamani, this particular shloka. It says, Chittasya Shuddhaye Karma Natu Vastupalabdhaye Vastu Siddhi Vicharena Siddhihi Vicharena Nakinchit Karma Kotibihi. So, one can do a lot of work. See, we have to understand this. You can be very clean, you can be very faithful, you can be very dharmic, we can be kind to others, we can be very compassionate, we can help others. All that will not liberate us. Please understand, because there is this wrong understanding a lot of people have. That is not the end of life. That is not the goal of life or end of life. Many people think, speak truth, be nice, be truthful, be dharmic, bring compassion, help. That's the end of the story. That's not the end of the story. All that, as Shankaracharya says, Chittasya Shuddhaye Karma. It will only purify our mind. Or if I have to use that previous mantra, it can help you for Mrityum Tirtva. It can help us cross the samsara, the ocean of birth and death. But then liberation does not happen with that. Therefore, how does the liberation happen? Vastu siddhihi vicharena. Unless we do vichara, unless we really, get into that sort of internal contemplation, unless we do it, Vastu will not be available to us. Meaning that Lakshya, the arrow which has to reach that ultimate Lakshya, will never be reached. Therefore, we need some mechanism for us for vichara. And that vichara is through the Upanishadic teachings. And na kinchit karma kotibihi. We can do good act, naishkamya karma, all that we can do. They are all only necessary condition. They are not sufficient condition. Liberation does not happen by merely being good, being simple, being truthful, being dharmic. No. That's only half the story. So for that vichara, we need Upanishad. We need to really focus and contemplate on the truth. And that is why the Upanishad is the vow. So that is the second part that we need to understand from this analogy. Then there is this mantram which says, Danur grihitva Upanishadam mahastram sharam hi upasita nishitam sandhayita. That sandhayita means connect or mount. Now, you can't have bow on your right hand, arrow on the left, or you can't have in a room bows and arrows. If you just keep both of them, then you will never reach the Lakshya. If the Lakshya, the target has to be hit, the arrow has to be mounted or connected to the bow. Without that, it is not going to actually happen. Merely having the bow does not mean that we will reach the target. The bow has to be mounted onto the arrow and released from the arrow. If that is not going to happen, then we will never be able to actually reach the target. Is it not? So in the same way, if you have Upanishads, you can't say, I have in my almirah full of karma jnana kanda books. A lot of people say, no, I have everything. By merely having Upanishad teaching, or by merely even having Upanishadic knowledge, not even teaching, knowledge. By merely having the knowledge, we will never be able to reach the Lakshya. So, essentially, what is this connecting with the Upanishad? Just as connecting with the arrow. Sandhiyata. How is the Jivatma and the Upanishad to be connected? Just like the arrow and the bow has to be connected. So how will the Jivatma and the Upanishad be connected? What do you mean by connecting? That is the next question. Because the mantra says Sandhayita. So therefore, we need to understand connecting means connecting to the teachings. Not merely knowing. See, a lot of people can recite Bhagavad Gita by heart. If you ask them to tell some Subhashitas, they will be able to recite some stotras. So many things they will do. But then if you ask, in their achara vichara, have they progressed? Have they progressed in their journey of liberation? I think that is the hardest question to ask. All other questions are secondary. All other questions, as I told just now, are subordinate. We have to do that, but not losing sight of the main. So these are sub bullets. We have just evaporated the main bullet. So therefore, the question is not knowing Upanishad by heart, reciting it effortlessly, all the 700 shlokas of Gita. I am reminded of one episode which I have heard. There was this in Madras, there was this Devaraja Mudaliar. He is a wealthy person and so on, who lived about 70 years, 80 years back, I think. Then in the 20th century, he lived. So he once went to Ramana Maharishi, and he said to Bhagavan, I have been reading this Bhagavad Gita. I've been seeing this Bhagavad Gita, reading it and so on. But nothing is happening to me, which many of us have that problem. So he is only echoing the problem that many of us seem to have. So he went to Ramana Maharishi and asked, I've been reading Bhagavad Gita every day, but Bhagavan, nothing is happening to me. What is all this? So what does it mean? So in his very characteristic manner, Ramana Maharishi simply said, he said, you are looking at the book every day. The book is telling you, please look at yourself. Like that, he gave a reply. In other words, what does this short sentence convey to us? It says, it is not merely knowing Upanishad, it is reflecting on it constantly. It is trying to understand what is the intended of the Upanishad, why certain things are being talked about in the Upanishad, what is the import of those meanings, all that, and trying to do a Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, all that. That's why I've just quoted this from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, this Maitreyi and that conversation that you have, in which he finally says, Atma va are drashtavya, shrotavya, mantavya, nididhyasitavya. So this Atma is not something to be read and memorized about thoroughly, word by word and all that. It is all, that is his Yajnavalkya Maitreyi Sambhashana. Finally he says that Atmava are drashtavyaha. It must be seen. Seen means experience. Seen inside. Seen means deeply experience. Anubhuti. Anubhava. Anubhuti. Drashtavyaha. Shrotavyaha. One needs to keep listening about it. Mantavyaha. One has to do manana. Which means what this Upanishad says, we have to constantly reflect on it. We need to understand what is being told there, why something is being told, etc., etc., and deeply imbibe that and internalize that. So only through that process, Shrotavyaha, Mantavyaha, Nididhyasitavyaha, through that Atmava are Drishtavyaha. So this whole process of Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, where a concept which is at a very superficial knowledge level, which goes only up to the intellectual plane, to the brains and so on, to percolate it down into one's hridaya, into one's own quintessential nature, is the meaning of the word connect, sandhayika, connecting. So the arrow must be connected to the bow. The Jivatma must be connected to the Jnana Kanda. And by connection, what we mean is trying to, internalize the ideas so that there is a possibility that it can influence our behavioral pattern. Otherwise, we will keep reading. We will keep reading, listening, all that, but life is as usual, morning to evening. We do the same set of things, and so while the sub bullets may be looking better, the Mula Uddesha, the main bullet, which is to reach the Lakshya, that might even disappear. That might be nowhere in the picture. So that is why the word Sandhayita must be understood is connecting to the concepts internally. So that is what is meant of this particular word Sandhayita. So Dhanurgrahitva Aupanishadam Mahastram Sharam Hyupasita Nishitam Sandhayita. That is the first line in which all these words have such specific connotations and deep implications. Then the second line, it says, I am ya. I am ya is to, withdraw inside or, backward, in a typical bow and arrow. We all know that you have to withdraw it, because only through that you create that tension. That force becomes kinetic force finally. What we achieve by way of drawing it backward, right? That is the force with which it will spring forward. Therefore, I am here is drawing backward or drawing inward. Now, in the case of our analogy of the Jivatma, what is this drawing inward? And again, this Kathopanishad, this famous mantra will explain it very well. It says, Kaschidiraha pratyagatmanam aikshat avritta chakshuhu amrtatvam ichan. Amrtatvam ichan, with the desire to reach that immortality, avritta chakshuhu, he turned his attention inward. All the time, most of us, almost all of us, all our sensory organs, all our attention span is always to the outside world. All the time. Even in sleeping, for a good amount of time, if you are dreaming in the sleep, our attention span is outside. We are not alone. We are not keeping ourselves to us, except in deep sleep. But in deep sleep, since we don't have any awareness, it is all ignorance. That anubhava is ignorance. There is no awareness. But even in sleep, we seem to be keeping our attention outside. That's why we are dreaming of so many things, which are all nothing but outside world. Not about me. It is about me and the outside world. I went there in the dream. You may go to the hotel and have some food. Then you'll go and see a cricket match, watch a movie. All kinds of things can happen. So, the only way by which we will be able to attain this superordinate goal of Atma Sakshatkara is, as this Kathopanishad mantra says, Avritta Chakshuhu. That the attention must turn inside. The attention is always outside. We should make an effort to turn inside. Amrtatvam ichan kaschid dhiraha. Such a person is indeed somebody who has used his buddhi very well. He is a dhira. Pratyagatmanam aikshat. He finally gets that kind of a vision, that experience. So therefore, this I am here, in the context of the bow and arrow, it provides that velocity for it to spring forward. In the case of our example, that drawing inward provides us that force, provides us that potential and momentum for us to reach our lakshya. That's what this mantra is saying, that avritta chakshuhu amrtatvam ichan. So that is the meaning of the word I am ya, which you find in the second line of this mantra. So there are a few other things also we need to be very clear. If you talk of the arrow and the target, as the analogy that we see here, there is a distance. there is a distance of physical distance, because the arrow is here and the target is there. So there is a certain physical distance between the arrow and the target, right? And there is a temporal distance also. The arrow was here at this point in time, and it will, provided it is released properly and so on, etc., etc., it will go and hit the target. So that elapsed time is a temporal distance. Distance in terms of time and distance in terms of space. But that doesn't, how about Jivatma and Brahman? Because, the Jivatma is the arrow, the target is the Brahman. So how do we handle this analogy? Where is this distance? Now, if you read all our scriptures, if you read all our, this Jnanakanda, it's always said that, in fact, Swami Vivekananda said man is potentially divine. In fact, Shvetashwara Upanishad says, Vayam sarve amritasya putraha. We are all children of immortality only. So we are already Brahman. That is the conceptualization. So there cannot be distance. Neither the physical distance nor a temporal distance is possible. So what is then the distance? And where is this distance being created? The distance is, first of all, it is only a notional distance. Okay. No, there are notional meaning. The distance is one of ignorance. The example is, if you see in Mahabharata, Karna is one of the, Pandavas, because Kaunteya, I would say, Kunti Putra. Karna is one of the Kunti Putras, in addition to the 5 Pandavas. That Karna is also one of the brothers of the Pancha Pandavas. There is a distance. The distance is out of ignorance. The distance happens only out of ignorance. Once the ignorance is cleared, then the distance, so it is a very notional distance. In Bhagavad Gita in chapter 5, it says, Ajnanena avritam jnanam tena muhyanti jantavaha. In chapter 5, you will find, I think, Shloka 15 or 16, you will find this. Ajnanena avritam jnanam tena muhyanti jantavaha. Then next shloka it says, Yata aditya jnanam prakashayati. So basically, this is another example is there. Yata aditya jnanam prakashayati. See, so imagine it is a very sunny day. It's a very cloudy day, monsoon time. Now, because of prayer experience, we know if we don't have prayer experience, we may think the sun is not there. Because, sun is not to be found. You look at the sky, it's almost pitch dark. Morning, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. It is like evening 6:37, almost half dark. Why? Because you have dark clouds. Now, that sun is not there. So there is a distance between you and this knowledge that sun is not there. Why? Because there is this clouds which have actually ajnanena avritam jnanam. So once the clouds go away, once the it rains and the clouds melt and so on, that's what that Bhagavad Gita mantra is, shloka is also saying. Yada aditya vajnanam prakashayati, tamas will go. So that is the only distance here. So the distance between Jivatma and the Brahman is one born out of ignorance. It is only a notional distance, because even in the first 2 mantras we say it is anoraniyan mahato mahiyan. We say atma nihita esya jantoho. It is very much here. First 2 mantras of this particular Mundaka also we saw that. So therefore, the distance is only notional. The distance is born out of huge ignorance that we are different from Brahman. And that distance has to be actually removed by removing the ignorance. So that is another issue which you need to understand about this. Now, how are these going to happen? There are certain, you can use the analogy and explain what are the conditions required for this to happen. Condition number one, the bow must be robust and reliable. Suppose the bow is, it's all half broken, the string is not well, tied and so on. What will happen? The arrow will not go, right? If the arrow has to meet the target, then the bow has to be robust and reliable. So in our example, the bow is the Jnana Kanda. And so the Jnana Kanda alone, again in the previous Mundaka, in the first Mundaka, second section, we saw that. We saw a mantra which said that, Ashta, 18 parts. Avara, Yata Andena Niyamana Etandaha, we saw one mantra actually in the first Mundaka. So if the proper knowledge is not there, that would be like a blind leading another blind. But the very idea of the Jnana Kanda, the very idea of the Upanishads in the Vedic corpus is to make sure that we will definitely reach the target of realizing the Brahman. So therefore, that is why we can say, yes, this bow is very robust, reliable. People have had prior experience. That's why Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 4, he says, Bhagavaha jnana tapasa puta madbhavam agataha vitaraga bayakrodaha manmayamam upashitaha Bhagavaha jnana tapasa putaha madbhavam agataha. They were purified by jnana tapas. What is that jnana tapas? It is this Upanishadic knowledge which they have done Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, etc. And they have internalized it. So so there are many such ways we can understand that the bow is actually very robust, very reliable. Therefore, mounting the arrow and the bow there is a good chance that it will reach the target. So that is condition one. Condition two is non-crookedness of the arrow. If the arrow is not straight, if it is bent, it is a little curved and so on. Aerodynamics will tell us, simple aerodynamics, principles of aerodynamics will tell us that even if you release the arrow, it will not go in a straight direction. It will just swivel and then go elsewhere. So one of the conditions for the arrow to meet a target, see, if I am standing here and there is a target, if I release the arrow, the very assumption I am making is it actually travels a rectilinear path, not, it goes like this and then falls somewhere. And in order for that to happen, the most important condition is that the arrow is not crooked. Now, if you bring to our example, which means the Jivatma should not be crooked. I mean, there is the equivalent of crookedness, which means Chitta Shuddhi is very important. And how do you get that? You get that through sadhana chatushtaya. As Shankaracharya says, Nitya Nitya Vastu Vicharaha, Iha Amutra Pala Viraga. That is the second one. Shamadhi Shat Sampat Mumukshutva. So these four, if people understand these four and then get onto that, then that Arjava will happen. Krishna talks this as Arjava. In chapter 13, when he talks, he says, Amanitvam, Adambitvam, Ahimsa, Kshantihi, Arjavam. That Arjavam is Rujbhava, straight. Kayena Vacha, Manase, Indriyeva, everything must be aligned. And in Bhagavad Gita, such a personality is called Yukta, one who is in sync, connected to the quintessential attributes and nature. So that's called Yukta. So, which means that Jivatma has to have some prior exercises, Jivatma must have a chitta shuddhi. Jivatma should not have distractions, because if Jivatma has all these distractions and all these, if chitta shuddhi is not there, the Upanishad cannot help them. He may misinterpret and then he may fall off the place, just like a crooked arrow cannot reach. So the second condition is non-crookedness of the arrow. Then the third condition is sharpness of the arrow. Nishitam upasa. That's what the mantra says. Sharpness is very important, because if only when the arrow is sharp, it will penetrate the target. Otherwise, it will bluntly go up to the target and fall. If you have to stay put, if it has to really penetrate and become part of the target, means it just penetrates and stays there, then the only way it can happen in the case of an bow and arrow example is that the arrow must be sharpened. It should be really sharp, so that when it goes and touches that, that's why the tip of the arrow is actually triangular, as you see. Generally, it's not a blunt, it is not a ball shape or anything like that. The tip will be sharp, because only then it will pierce, and then once it hits the target, it can pierce and go in and be part of it. So in the same way, since the Jivatma is the arrow and the target is the Brahman, the whole idea of this exercise is Brahma Aikyatva, Brahma Atma Aikyatva. It is not, that seeing, experiencing that Advaita Bhava, the Brahma Bhava, not the Veda Bhava. So therefore, the Jiva must be sharpened. And if you take the example of the arrow. So what is the, how is it sharpened? The Upanishad itself says that Upasa, he Upasa, Nishitam Sharam, Sandhiyata. That's what Sandhiyata. That's what it says. So therefore, through Upasana, through constant Upasana, the Jivatma is sharpened, is made really, alive and to those things related to, Brahma Sakshatkara. That is why we have so many daily, in our Sanatan Dharma, we have so many daily practices, doing Sandhya Vandana, Trikala Sandhya Vandana, or, for such of those who don't do Sandhya Vandana, are not required to do Sandhya Vandana, then there is Upasana of Bhakti, Stotra, Parayana, a little bit of Dhyana, meditation. All these are ways by which, so all these are the various modes of Upasana. Not everybody have to compulsorily do Trikala Sandhya Vandana. Some are required to do, some are not required to do. But that doesn't mean, people have no opportunity. There are multiple things being told for such of those who don't have to do Veda Adhyayana. One can do Vishnu Sahasranama Parayana, one can do Bhakti, one can do, Parayana, one can do meditation. That's why he says, in chapter 10 of Bhagavad Gita, he says of all the things, he says, Japa is the best. Of all the upasanas, Japa is the best. Because, only personal effort is required. You don't need money, you don't need any samagri, nothing is required, you can do dhyana. So these are practices which are part of our Sanatana Dharma, our dinachari, our daily achara vichara, because only by regularly practicing all these, the vyakti is sharpened and the desire for sakshatkara grows and glows in such a person. So that is why sharpness of the arrow is indicated. That is the third condition. Upasa Nishitam. There is a typo there. It is not Apasa Nishitam. It is Upasa Nishitam. There is a typo here. Fourth condition, I already spoke about it, so I don't have to speak much. Arrow must be mounted on the bow. Sandhayita. If you don't connect these two, the arrow, you can't keep in inventory of bows and inventory of arrows, you'll never reach the Lakshya. Therefore, to reach the Lakshya, the arrow needs to be mounted on the bow. We already spoke about it in some detail, so I don't have to explain this condition once again. Arrow to be withdrawn to gain momentum, which is what the mantra says, I am. Yeah. Again, we spoke about it, how it is important to develop that kind of a internal momentum. Avrita chakshuhu amritatvam ichanna. He says, pratyagatmanam aikshat kaschiddirah. So that is what it is. I don't have to again talk about this. Now, there is one thing which we haven't spoken about, and that is in going back to the analogy. If I go back to the analogy, if I just go back to the analogy, in this analogy, I mean, we haven't really spoken about the archer. Now we have just, the Upanishad has left it silent, actually. Now the question is, who is this archer and what is really happening? So one way one can understand this is by way of also saying that the guru can be the archer. In fact, in this Upanishad itself, we saw it. We saw tat vijnanartam sa gurumeva bigacche samitapanihi shrotriyam brahmanishtam. We saw that. You know, in the first Mundaka's second section, the last 10th or 11th mantra, he said, you know, he Nastya krita kritaha, we saw a very nice mantra. Whatever is happening in this world is good, not good enough. I think we need to do something more. And therefore, tat vijnanartam sa gurumeva bigachet samitpanihi shotriyam brahmanishtam. So implicitly, we can say that for us to travel, for all these to happen, for us to, you know, get to contact with the Upanishad, for us to be constantly put into upasana, for us to be reflecting on the teachings of the Upanishad, all these, if we really want, then it is all done. The catalyst in the whole process is the guru. So one can say probably the archer is the guru. The guru enables this whole action happening, the arrow being mounted on the bow, the arrow being withdrawn back and released, etc., etc. All these are in a way orchestrated, catalyzed, everything done by probably the guru. So one can say that maybe the archer is the equivalent of the archer is the guru, and we need that right guru so that our journey on this path is constant and without any wasteful effort. So that is the most important thing for us to understand. So this analogy is a very deep analogy. Look at the beauty of the rishis. Such deep concepts have been simply laid out with a simple analogy of a bow and arrow and a lakshya and all that. So since this is very important, I thought we must revisit and get to reflect more on the details of this analogy. The next mantra is also the sort of, these two mantras are together actually. So the next mantra reiterates that what is this lakshya and what is all this bow and all that. It reiterates this analogy. So we will look at the next mantra. Pranavo dhanush sharo hyatma brahmatal lakshya uchyate apramattena vedavyam sharavattanmayo bhavet pranavo dhanusharo yatma brahmatal lakshya uchyate apramattena vedavyam sharavattanmayo bhavet. Pranavaha dhanuhu sharaha hi atma. Brahmaha tat lakshyam uchyate. Tat plus lakshyam becomes tal lakshyam. So this is again a sharo, not sharo. There is a typos. I think it's again a type. I think I should correct it. It is actually sharo, not sharo. Anyway. So pranavaha danuhu, sharaha hi atma, brahma tat lakshyam uchyate. That is what the padacheda of the first line. And then the second line says, apramattena vedavyam, sharavat tat tatmaya, tat plus mayaha, tanmayaha. So in Sandhi it becomes tanmayaha. Sharavat tanmayaha bhavet. So it is only sort of clarifying it with a slight improvisation of that idea. It says pranavaha danuhu. Earlier it said Aupanishadam Shastram Danurgrihitva Mahastram Danuhu. Here it says Pranava is the Danu. Now earlier it said the Upanishads is the Danus. And we said the entire Jnana Kanda, the Upanishadam basically means, what I said was that the entire Jnana Kanda that is available in the Vedic corpus. Now here it is saying Pranavaha Danuhu. So now it is replacing that Upanishad and Jnana Kanda with Pranava. And there are good reasons why it is doing. Sharaha hi Atma, that we already saw it. Brahmaha tat lakshyam uchyate. So that also we have seen. So basically the first line is reiterating what was the analogy with an important change. And that change is, it said Pranava is the Dhanus, not the Upanishadam. Not the Upanishad and the Jnana Kanda and that Vedic corpus and so on. So we need to only understand why it is replacing Pranava. Pranava is nothing but Omkara. So it says Omkara is the Dhanus. So the first line of this mantra is in a way summarizing what the previous mantra is saying, except for replacing Upanishad with the word Omkara. Then second line says Apramattena vedavyam, without distraction. See, even if you take that analogy, we know the example of Arjuna. Arjuna was we know the story in Mahabharata where Drona called every one of them and asked them, what do you find there? So people said, Duryodhana said, I see a tree and a bird in the tree. Yudhishthira said, of course, I see the tree, the bird, the legs and so on. It is only Arjuna who said, I am only seeing the two eyes of the bird. So that is that apramattena. That when an archer or when a arrow has to be released and when an arrow has to be directed, it should be directed in a totally non-distractive fashion. There should be no distraction whatsoever, because to that extent it will take out the concentration and the energy out. So it says apramattena vedavyam. Then sharavat tanmayo bhavet. Just like the arrow, when it went and pierced into the target, it became part of the target. Sharavat tanmayaha bhavet. We should, once this experience happens to us, we should become that ekatva, aikya with the Brahman. So we should become one with the Brahman. So that's what it is saying. So I think the most important thing is the pranava and the apramatta. Now Omkara, there is so much being talked about in Omkara in our entire Vedic corpus. In fact, the Mandukya Upanishad is all about Omkara, Akara, Ukara, Makara, and that silence is the subject matter of Mandukya Upanishad. And Om is considered to be, Vedanam Chandasam Mata is Gayatri. For Gayatri, it is the Omkara. So therefore, the entire Vedic corpus and the entire knowledge repository came out of Om. I mean, all these are being, that's why it says Pranava is the Dhanus. Look at Bhagavad Gita here. I have given these two shlokas. Omiti ekaksharam brahma vyakharan mam anusmaran yaha prayati tyajan deham sayati paramam gatim. That single pointed focus on Om and uttering of that ekaksharam called Om. If somebody tyajanti deham, tyajan deham, by at the time of leaving their body, if they are able to vyagaran mam anusmaran, remembering me, they utter the word Omkara, sahayati param gatim. So that Omkara upasana, Omkara meditation is the ultimate. So that is the one which will take us to the Lakshya. That's why it replaced the Upanishadam in the mantra 3 with Pranavaha in mantra 4. Look at again, that is why in chapter 10 also he says, Hiram Asmi Ekam Aksharam. I am the entire Vedic repository and corpus. In that I am the Omkara. Ekam Aksharam is actually Omkaram. Maharshinam Brigraham Giram Asmi Ekam Aksharam. Yajnanam Japa Yajnosmi. I talked about it. Yajnanam Japa Yajnosmi. The best thing is to do Japa. Stavaranam Himalaya. Anyway, so this Omkara is hugely celebrated. The Omkara meditation, the Omkara as its importance, and the Mundakopanishad detailed discussions on Akara, Ukara, Makara, and Anusandhana, and all that, that explains that Omkara will take us. Omkara Upasana, deep contemplation, possibly can take us to the Lakshya. That's why Pranavo Dhanuhu is what it is being talked about. Now, Apramattena Vedavyam. What is Shankara Bhashya telling about it? He says, Bahya Vishaya Upalabdhi. See, Bahya Vishaya, if our attention span goes out, for what? Something, I want to get this, Upalabdhi. I want to get this, I want to get that, I want to reach this, I want a better house, I want a better job, I want a promotion, etc. Hundred thousands of things. That creates Trishna, that desire to go after all of them, and that can lead to Pramada, some foolish actions and wrong things that we may end up doing it. So, Varjitena, you have to be devoid of all these. That is the first definition Shankaracharya gives. Apramatena means what? Bahya Vishaya Upalabdhi Trishna Pramadi Varjitena. Devoid of all these Bahya Vishaya Upalabdhi Trishna Pramadi. Sarvato Viraktena. You should develop that deep sense of detachment. Only then that apramatta will happen. So, sarvato viraktena, jitendriyan. If the first two happens, one will conquer one's own senses. The senses will be conquered. So, jitendriyena, ekagra chittena. On account of it, the chitta will become ekagrata. So, it is a four-step process which Shankaracharya gives. He says, Bahya Vishaya Upalabdhi Trishna Pramadi Varjitena, Sarvato Viraktena, Jitendriyena, Ekagra Chittena, Apramattena Vedavyam. Vedavyam Brahma Lakshyam. So that is the meaning of Apramattena Vedavyam. So this is how these two mantras are. These two mantras are very, very important. They although it is a simple analogy, it conveys the Upanishad in a very compact fashion has given us how to reach Brahma Sakshatkara. This is the only way we can reach Brahma Sakshatkara. It has put it out in compact and concise manner, which can be expanded. One can expand even more these mantras, but I think we will have to leave it at this. And in the next class, we will move on to mantra 5 and then further into this, what the Upanishad is telling us about this whole process. With this, we will stop it for the day. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om. Okay.